about 30 members representing 8 sectors. We wanted to make sure we're capturing the diverse folks that live and work in the landscape. So that includes the non-government organizations, including many on the call, as well as state wildlife agencies, federal agencies, academia, indigenous, industry, foundations, and of course, private landowners. And it's a shared landscape. So we also wanted to make sure we had representation from Canada, the US, and Mexico. And from a landowner providing perspective, that's been Bill Milton, as well as Steve Jester with Partners for Conservation. We also have a landowner advisory group that's been helping as well. So hopefully many of you did participate, but if you didn't, you can go to www.grasslandsroadmap.org and you can see everything that's been compiled to date, including all the talks that happened last year, as well as a lot of the different documents that people are putting up and sharing. But we had a virtual summit. We had hoped to come together as a diverse community, but COVID thwarted that. So we had 250 participants representing 150 organizations. Again, those 8 sectors. It kicked off in the spring. We sent out a survey to get a real sense of where people were with Grasslands to help set the stage for this virtual meeting. And we used this to frame out 3 series of talks. And we really talked about indigenous voices, landowner voices, Canada, US, and Mexico, partner voices from World Wildlife Fund to the Nature Conservancy to Audubon, to initiatives and legislation. Then we had breakout groups. So people were put into themes if you wanted to focus on partnerships and engagement, research and evaluation, or policy and funding. And we really tried to dive in on what are the priority needs in these 3 themes that we need to be thinking about. We also wanted to make sure that we needed the voices from people. We needed the leaders to be hearing it. So we had a leadership session that reacted to some of the draft priorities we were elevating. And then we went back together in our groups and helped craft a 4-page summary to help really identify priorities that we need to be doing under these 3 themes. So obviously that was more of a top-down approach, trying to think 30,000 foot level. And now we're working on a process to get more bottom up. So again, 4-page summary, it's available at that www.grasslandsroadmap.org website. 12 priorities were identified through that effort. But at the end of the day, the rubber meets the road on the land, in your backyards, in your communities. So we're now working to get more regional state input. We want to have intentional conversations with state wildlife agencies, with NRCS, with indigenous leaders, and with landowners. We did give a talk to the Society for Range Management. We also gave a talk to the South Dakota Grassland Coalition. We are be talking to the SRM at the South Dakota level next month. We would love your ideas on additional groups and landowners to be talking to as we move forward. This just gives you, this isn't kind of looks like our universe right now, but this is trying to help show how the pieces and parts are coming together. So the steering committee has been helping plan this out, keep the energy going. Bird Conservancy was just the convening organization, just trying to be the catalyst to get us together, to kind of change how we work and ultimately work better together to have bigger impacts. And then these working groups have formed, and Matt is just helping with the conversations, keeping us on track, making sure we're actually getting to actions and processes. And these folks now in these different groups are trying to figure out, well, what does that roadmap mean? What does it mean to us? And what are some of the priorities and even sprint goals we could be working on or helping catalyze? So we've got industry talking, we've got foundations, we have a group talking about measures and metrics. We also are being intentional with landowners as well as folks who work in policy. I just wanted to pull out that land stewards, we have a landowner advisory group, but again, like conversations today, we want to continue to get more landowner voices. We're also trying to make sure that we're really addressing the next farm bill, what's working well in there and what isn't, and what can we change, and even pilot this year to help inform the next farm bill. So I know with Bill, we're hoping to talk to the ACES group as well as the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance. And we'd like to be doing that and moving south as well, and even looking at Canada and Mexico and their communities there. So getting back to the roadmap and those 12 priorities, what we all agreed upon was our criteria for collaborative action. So as we develop priorities, sprint goals, and get this moving forward, we want to make sure that these 8 criteria are met. And I wanted to really emphasize sustaining human populations, maintaining the producer way of life is a priority, as well as sustaining grazing in a working lands context that supports large tracts of connected grassland habitats. Also, research-informed practices, honoring and learning from the local voices from the land. I think sometimes we tend to forget that people have been out here for generations and they know a lot more than we do, and making sure we're bringing that into the equation. Improving land health, ecosystem processes, biodiversity, as well as conserving water, and arresting these declines that I talked about from birds to pollinators and other species. So those 12 priorities, you can kind of put them in 5 big buckets. So we really want to increase support of local initiatives like this group, as well as the WIN-IT ACES and RSA, help catalyze pilot efforts that can inform the next farm bill. What does it look like? Does everything have to be, our easements? Can there be more flexibility? Can there be term easements that could then morph into longer term easements? CRP, once we've invested in it and it doesn't qualify, or we have acreage caps, how can we keep it in grass? Can we have incentives as we look at the different species our land supports, and trying to move from maybe a couple species to several species? How can we incentivize that and make it economically viable? Some of you have heard of the North American Grasslands Act. If and as that gets approved, we want to make sure that Western voices and values are included in it. So we've sent that out in our newsletter, which you can go to the right, upper right in the website, and you can actually click on the newsletter and learn more about that. Many of you are aware that the states are trying to increase funding through the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. That's just taking offshore oil and gas funding and putting it into conservation for those species of greatest conservation needs. So ultimately, we can keep management local and avoid future listings. Addressing limitations in the Farm Bill. What economic incentives? How do we get to resilient landscapes of people and wildlife? There was also a big interest in trainings and speaker bureaus and just the way for people to connect and learn from each other. I know Bill was pretty inspired by Alejandro, who spoke in Mexico, and what he's been doing on his ranch. Lessons learned, and how could we share not only across our own counties and states, but even across our countries. And even trainings on how to work with diverse communities, from landowners to indigenous communities, and understanding different values and perspectives. And then just ultimately, obviously, building trust and relationships. And we want to make sure that a lot of people know about rainforests, right? They know about wetlands, but they don't value and understand much about grasslands. So how could we as a collaborative community elevate the importance of grasslands, from our food to our well-being, to our quality of air and water? How can we also, where people are being innovative, help bring more awareness for diverse products? And then addressing knowledge gaps. So like I mentioned, birds are in steep decline, pollinators, but we don't necessarily know all the key factors and what life stage is most limiting. So how can we help address those knowledge gaps and make sure that we're doing the right things in the right places? That's where monitoring and evaluation comes in as well. And then making sure we're doing good investments and making progress towards the outcomes. And then learning and adapting as we go. So I know the 30 by 30 is big, scary, concerning. What does this mean in the West? I know I've heard there's folks, a land grab they're going to take, and I want to let's just have an honest conversation. The partners that have been part of this, this is a working landscape. This is, how do we make this an opportunity versus a threat? How do we help guide what this looks like in the West? What voluntary opportunities help reach that 30 by 30 while still ensuring private lands and tribal lands? And Matt's going to circle us back, and as we break into groups, we can talk more about this. I just wanted to get some kind of seeds going as you can get your juices flowing on thoughts and what we can do. How can this change from a threat to an opportunity? And how can we help make sure it works in this landscape? What could work for Montana? What works for you? And how can the Farm Bill contribute to this? And what does the Farm Bill just not going to cover or get us through, and what other options exist? And then ultimately, how do we help make grasslands more profitable? I think many of you are aware that Natural Resources Conservation Service just in April launched their Great Plains Framework. And this is part of the Grasslands Roadmap effort. It's their contribution. They want to conserve about 10 million acres over the next 5 years. So you can see that grasslands are being elevated with lots of different folks, from nonprofit organizations, state agencies to federal agencies, including NRCS, FSA, Fish and Wildlife Service. So as this gets on the ground, what does this look like in the north? Keeping grass in grass, keeping CRP in grass. Challenges in the north that are relevant, like annual invasive species, putting marginal cropland back to grasslands. There is some Great Plains Initiative funding, but that's going more to south and east of this region to deal particularly with woody encroachment, and eastern red cedar is a big target. So a lot of times when we do plans, we get to the outputs, but we want to make sure we're getting to the outcomes, and that these outcomes matter to the diverse sectors out there. So from a bird's perspective, we want to look at, can we get to stabilizing these declines in 10 years? And then ultimately trying to actually see increases in several of these species that are of concern. So as we get into our group in a few minutes, what measures matter to you? Do some of these resonate? Keeping family ranches maintained? The economics of grass? Is it cattle on the landscape? Is it acres of grass? Again, what will you want to see measured so you know that this is headed in the right direction and reflects your values? So we're also talking about, as we look at the diverse landscape, honoring and bringing that human layer from private lands to tribal lands, the community collaboratives, so we can help with getting more energy going where there's collaboratives, starting different collaboratives, but honoring that human footprint across our landscape. Adding in the birds, maybe the pollinators and some other key species, including what different life stage they occupy during migration or wintering or stopover. Right now, there's about 600 million acres within this central flyway or central Great Plains. 220 are still in grassland. The rest is either cultivated, invaded by woody shrubs, or invaded by woody trees. So when we think about measures, large buckets, millions of acres voluntarily enrolled in some of these different opportunities, from protected with easements to enhanced and restored. So I know maps can create opportunity, but also create fear. We are trying to figure out, what does this look like out on the landscape? What are the current conditions? Where are opportunities? You will see the purple here is areas that has either been converted or in encroachment, particularly a lot of trees. Some of these areas, there should be trees, right? Pine Ridge, Black Hills. I know there's trees up in the CMR area. But again, about 200 million acres are in core grassland, and they estimate about half have potentially at risk of conversion. And then the rest is either invaded with trees or other shrubs. We're also working, Bird Conservancy works with several partners in Mexico, and this is kind of the bottleneck for where a lot of these grassland birds go. So we're trying to make sure we reflect the landscape down there and what are the opportunities for conservation as well. So in your region, like we said, invasive annuals like cheatgrass, keeping working lands working, minimizing conversion to cropland, and taking acres that were converted that just aren't sustainable and getting it back to grasslands. And then for willing landowners that are interested, easements or other opportunities. So I'd love you to think about in the breakouts, what's this map mean to you? Is this a threat? Is this an opportunity? What can we do better or different? And then as we're in the breakouts, just again, more conversations like today, wanting to make sure we're recognizing the diversity of landowners out there, and opportunities and challenges in Montana are going to be different than Colorado, are going to be different from Texas, which is going to be different from Canada and Mexico. What's working, what isn't, what measures matter, how, if we want to put out a survey to get more input, because it's, you know, having several of these meetings, but also there's places where we don't have local collaboratives and we want to make sure we're getting voices from all across the land. Are there trusted partners like Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever that could send it out? World Wildlife Fund, Bird Conservancy, other partners, and then just other groups that you know of that we could be on an agenda to have these conversations. So again, thank you so much for being here. I was going to stop and kind of turn it over to Matt so he can help set the stage. Does that sound okay, Bill and Liv?
Go ahead, Matt.
Great, thanks, Tammy. I thought maybe we'd take a couple minutes before we move into breakout groups. And so just to set the stage for the next hour, we wanted to move into some small breakout rooms of about 6 or 7 people. Tammy mentioned some questions and a worksheet that we have. And Bill and Tammy and Liv and I will be kind of split up into those rooms to help those conversations. And then we'll come back together and report out from those, and then ask a few more questions as a whole group to continue to get the feedback and input that Tammy outlined in the talk. Before we do that, we've got a couple minutes here. I just wanted to see if there were any big kind of overarching questions, if we can save our sort of responses or thoughts about the roadmap to the breakout groups for now, that would be great. But if you have kind of big clarifying questions that would be useful for others to hear, we'd welcome those right now.
Yeah,